Hello, and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 715th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, the Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Robert Storr, David Salle, Jordan Casteel, and Phong H. Bowie. We're thrilled to welcome poet Parker Menzimer here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustained and enriched the stolen land that we're speaking from. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's guests and host. Preeminent art critic, curator, artist, and educator Robert Storr is the former dean of Yale School of Art and senior curator in the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. He's written for numerous catalogs. He's written articles and books on major 20th and 21st century artists. He was the first American to serve as visual arts director of the Venice Biennale and has been researching and writing on Philip Guston for more than 3 decades. Artist David Salle's paintings have been shown in museums, galleries, and major international expositions worldwide for over 35 years. Salle is a regular contributor to the New York Review of Books and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters. A collection of his essays, How to See, was published in 2016 by W.W. Norton. Artist Jordan Casteel is known for her figurative and landscape-based oil paintings. She has rooted her practice in the reciprocity between painter and subject through community engagement and an increasingly poignant vantage point of self-reflection. Casteel received her BA in studio art from Agnes Scott College and her MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale School of Art. In 2021, Casteel was named a MacArthur Fellow. And our host today is artist, writer, and independent curator Phong H. Bowie, who is publisher and artistic director of the Brooklyn Rail. And with that, it's my absolute pleasure to pass it over to you, Phong.
Thank you, Chloe. I'm super delighted to be here with David, with Jordan for sure. Robert is running fast back to his computer, so give him maybe 2-3 more minutes until he joins us, but I'm gonna begin anyway, just to get things started. I think that having just gone back just yesterday and spent a good 2.5 hours there at the Guggenheim, I would say one of the most wonderful pleasure in life, I would say, as much as for general viewers, art lovers, even very specific admirers of painting culture, so to speak, as the 4 of us here today. Obviously here, 3 of us happen to be writers and 2 of us happen to be curators. This is to say Jordan is the only one who hasn't quite yet emboldened by the urge to pick up the pen to write or come in to experience the curation as an addiction. But let me say it again, one of the most wonderful pleasure in life is when the power of art strips us naked once again. It's as if what we have held to be truth before or say comprehensively understood from what came to us, our most thoughtful, even plausible comprehension, I would say, of how we might have felt to be this or that particular meditation or static confession, 1 or 2 upon a time. We all proven to be not the case here, all of that. It's simply a joy, I would say, to see something else that we didn't see before. It's simply a joy to discover that the work that we admire in a certain way before turn out to be asking us to be more looking at it really differently, in a totally different way altogether. So as Alex have always been insistent on the immediate present in his work, and we see his immediate environment unfolding before his eyes, be it downtown New York City, be it in Lincolnville, Maine. I, in fact, went to see the show yesterday, which I say, and you know, it opened to entirely refresh my experience altogether in this immediate present. So the result reconfirm my previous visit, I think even more so, in that everything I have been taken for granted about Alex's work, despite of having privilege in being his studio in West Broadway in Soho and Slap Row, Lincolnville, so many times, so frequently over the years, has no longer applied to the greater unity of Alex as a person. As John Ashbery, our mutual friend, once called him the clean ankle bohemian, and Alex the painter as the stylish king of his art. At Coco Chanel once say, fashion comes and go, but style stays. My overall feeling of this retrospective is whatever Alex chose from the beginning of his career to engender restraint and rationality above emotion and feelings. It's the motion and feelings, however subtle in its countless ways, that are most made, I would say, visible for the first time, at least to my own case. It's the emotion and feelings that stem from this cosmic energy that is similarly described in Whitman, 1871, Democratic Vistas, and his response to the dismissive criticism of America by the British statesman and poet Thomas Carlyle in his essay, you all remember, Shooting Niagara and After. As we all remember how Whitman condemned the corruption and greed of the Gilded Age, denouncing the post-Civil War materialism that was certainly taking over the country at the time, as we generally now felt of how our politicians and businessmen, I would include Silicon Valley in the mix, are all secondhand to each other, while neglecting talking to the middle class and working class Americans at the moment. Never was there perhaps more hollowness at heart than at present. And here in the United States, genuine beliefs seem to have left us. Uncle What, as we call Whitman at the Rail, Uncle What's solution to this moral crisis was simply providing literature. 2 or 3 poets, a real, genuine, original American poet would give more compaction and more moral identity, the quality today most needed across the state, than all of his constitution, legislative and judicial ties he once declared. You know, so it's a belief that the fact of art and literature would unite the country. This prevalent sentiment is how I came to see Alex's work. And as a total humanist, never before I realized how much Alex loved people as much as he loves nature. There is a poetic sense of warmth in his work, which I would like to explore for the first time with you all. I thought it would be productive if we were to have a brief discussion about how we each felt about the show, along with question, I don't know, maybe no more than 15 minutes, then we'll share with our friends in the audience. Maybe we have like 20 images, and then we can make comments for another 40 minutes or so, open up Q&A right away. So I thought I could like to begin with you, David. Since you began writing, as we just talked just 5 minutes ago, that you came to New York in '95, writing for Richard Martin in Arts Magazine. Do you remember the first time you encountered Alex's work, and has your perception changed much over the years, and especially now with this retrospective?
Yeah, well, actually, it was 1975, not 95. It was a long time ago.
75, I meant 75.
I was aware of Alex's work even before I came to New York. I mean, I was aware of it when I was a kid. I was always painting and looking at paintings, looking at contemporary paintings. So it was already by the early 70s, mid-70s, a kind of figure in the firmament. So what does the work mean to me? I was always aware of it as something that stood somewhat apart from the other, let's say mainstream currents running for the art world in the 70s, for sure. But since my orientation had initially been precisely toward figurative painting, it wasn't outside my concerns, but it wasn't, let's say, didn't represent the so-called cutting edge of whatever art talk was at that time. I've always been struck by the translational aspect of Alex's process. As I say, it's very immediate. The response in the work, the response that the work records in a way is very immediate. However, that immediacy is a little bit of an illusion because it's built up systematically over a process of refinement and distillation, which is something that I always understood instinctively and intellectually, and also was in sympathy with, even if I couldn't do something comparable myself. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the overall freshness of Alex's surface, the appearance of Alex's paintings, is a production. It's a result of a very specific technical production.
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I was always interested in and drawn to, and I don't find very many other examples like it in among Alex's generation, or of any generation for that matter.
Yeah.
So that was the kind of starting point. It continued, my interest continued like that for decades. The show at the Guggenheim merely confirmed the constructed nature of this Katzian kind of universe. That is, I think, as you aptly point out, Phong, has a humanist dimension, which is not always acknowledged because of Alex's own personal cool temperament and his lack of sentimentality. It's easy to miss the humanistic or humanist impulse that drives it. So I think you're right to focus attention on that. But all realist painting of whatever style or whatever period is an act of translation. It's you translating 3 dimensions to 2, solid form into lines and planes and colors. So that's a given. But the way that one makes that translation manifest, and the way one makes that translation apparent or not apparent, is the defining characteristics of an artist's style. And the efficiency with which Alex makes that translation is something that I've always found to be very compelling.
Well, that's just terrific response, David. Thank you for that. I know that when I was there with Jordan at the, sardine pack opening, we both was taken by the work so much that we didn't really want to socialize so much. So I would love to ask the same impression. When do you first encounter Alex's work, Jordan? And what was that at the moment at the opening that you didn't want to talk so much and just focus on looking at the paintings?
Yeah, I mean, so my encounter with Alex's work didn't happen until much later in life. I mean, my journey to art is sort of a later journey in some regard, even though I'm quite young. But the amount of time that I've been working is pretty short in terms of my exposure to art and understanding the kind of canon of contemporary art and art history was much less, like my understanding was basically non-existent compared to my peers as I entered my MFA program at Yale. And I recall I was dabbling in portraiture then, and Alex's name was kind of presented to me as somebody whose work I should understand and get to know. And in all honesty, in that moment, I think the thing that I was most drawn to and understood was that he was using the landscape kind of his life as subjectivity, that it was all the people and places. There's an energy and a depth of experience that is being captured within his work, which I felt the most connected to at that time. And the use of color and composition and the way that the compositions had kind of changed over time, and whether it was kind of a full figure and then playing with doubling, it was like there was a certain playfulness and willingness to explore that I found myself attached to. But I had little to no experience with seeing, besides maybe a singular work at like in an institution around the country. I had never seen a body of work of his together like I did in that moment at the Guggenheim. And even as I was preparing to go to that opening, I remember just kind of being like, gotta go to this Guggenheim opening, you know? And then I got there and was immediately like, I felt transformed into like as a painter. I wanted everybody else to disappear. All of a sudden, I just wanted to be lost in the work. And I was seeing a dimensionality to Katz and his work and the development over time that I was not familiar with. I had not engaged with the landscapes. I had not engaged with the studies, with the kind of development of the practice. As David, you were saying, that there's a real, although it feels like, and the end goal is a certain immediacy, that there's so much that goes into those works before we get to the point of putting paint on canvas. And even within that, I think it just felt so obvious to me in that moment, the amount of care and humanism and just connection to the world. I felt like I was getting to know Alex as somebody who has never actually met him. I felt like I knew him at that opening, and within those kind of paintings, a world of his. I saw the kind of ebb and flow of probably times that the work probably, I could see paintings and be like, I bet you this was definitely misunderstood at a time, but I'm glad that it's here now. You know, like I could see that there were probably evolutions that took place, which was just so affirming as a young artist who's kind of moving in a similar way at this moment, trying to kind of find my own identity and expand it and be committed to the work. And it was just so clear how committed to the work he is.
Yeah.
And that was awe-inspiring. Yeah, I didn't want to talk. You were right. We saw each other. I was like, hi, I don't even want to like talk to anybody. I'm so engulfed. But I couldn't really disappear.
I was caught in the same predicament. That's why I came back, because it's just so compelling to see that, as David pointed out, this imminent warmth, and you can see that right through the surface how it was painted. Robert is on his way. He's not quite yet here with us. So I'm going to turn to you, David, because in your piece, which is so wonderful, it's a leading essay in your terrific book, how to see. I mean, just amazing book. So I wanted to mention, because of the fact that you mentioned you propose, I would say, the focus on what in art, which been the most important issue, the what in art, at least in 1865, especially with Manet, Olympia, of course, shocking subject matter, which is the what, because it was a big deal. Everybody can talk about it, but essentially what reveals as to how Pacific way of making it, be the sense of touch, or say the viscosity of the paint relating to the image. In your words, David, I like the word, the work psychic temperature or surface energy. So can you describe what you mean by the how?
Yeah, thanks, Phong. I mean, it's actually a really simple concept. I'm not really amazed, but at the same time, I'm sometimes amazed that we still even have to talk about it after however long it's been, close to 200 years. It's much easier to talk about what something is a picture of. It's a landscape, it's a still life, it's a portrait. It's a portrait of this kind of person in this kind of environment, this person, this representing this kind of class, whatnot. Those are the things which anyone can see, and it's easy to transmit those facts in a newspaper or over the telephone. But that has so little to do with whether something is interesting as art. It's kind of astonishing that it has such a tenacious hold on us, the idea of subject matter. What I said in that piece and other pieces, and I have been saying it for so many years in different circumstances, it sounds kind of redundant, but anyway, is that what makes something, what gives a painting a specific identity is not what it's a picture of, but how those effects are achieved. That is to say, how it's done. How it's done is the art part. The subject matter, in a way, is the starting point, or the agreement, or the assignment, let's say, if you're in school or not even in school. It's the premise. It's the premise of the show. It's let's say it's the plot point, but how the characters are embodied by the actors is more likely to be the thing which keeps your attention if you're watching something. So with painting, it's simply the physical fact of how that paint goes down on the canvas, and at the point of impact where the brush hits the canvas, as almost simplistically or simple-mindedly reductivist as that sounds, like how could it possibly just come down to that? But that is the basic building block of painting. What's interesting is that when certain artists have focused a large part of their work on that very fact, like I'm thinking now of Jasper, obviously, the courage to foreground that, the language of touch, dispersal, rhythm, those kinds of things which govern the pulse, the ebb and flow of energy over a surface of paint. When that has been foregrounded, it's been taken up as a critical cause célèbre. But when it's merely part of one's work on a cellular level, as it is in Alex's case, people tend to miss it, which is funny if you think about it.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's hard to make the comparison without sounding kind of snooty, or without making it into an invidious comparison. But anyway, what the hell? It's easier to see when you look at some of Alex's peers who were also painting figuratively around the same time. And it's not a qualitative distinction, but it's on my mind today because I happened to read his obituary in today's New York Times that Philip Pearlstein just died, who used to show with Alex at the Tanager Gallery, that cooperative gallery where they all showed in the 50s.
Oh.
So Philip Pearlstein was also a figurative painter who also turned to the figure unfashionably in the 60s, when it was probably a highly questionable decision to do so. Someone who painted very instinctively and with a clear sense of the relationship between technique and intention and image. And yet they're a similar generation. I mean, Philip was a few years older. But you can see the enormous difference in appearance, difference in attitude, difference in effect of their work. But if you just categorize them as old guys making figurative painting, kind of old guys making realist paintings, they were kind of in the same category, but their work has nothing to do with each other. So that coming back to my original statement, the idea of how what you see is translated into what kinds of brushstrokes you make, that is the drama of painting.
Yeah.
And the thing that defines Alex's style more than anything else, I mean, there are many components that one could point to, and we could go through the whole list, but the thing which really separates him from every other painter is the use of the big brush.
Yeah.
So you look at how the paintings are actually painted. And if you go to his studio and you see his working tools, there are, it's almost axiomatic that Alex will take the biggest possible brush to execute that particular passage, to fill in that particular area with paint, which gives his work automatically a certain character and a certain energy. And I'm going to say something which is going to sound very chauvinistic. It gives it a certain Americanness right off the bat. And I think that big brush directness and Americanness is something that links Alex directly to de Kooning. And that was the thing that really separated de Kooning from all of his peers. There were many talented painters of de Kooning's generation, obviously, and each one in their own way. And certainly the generation immediately following de Kooning, which is actually Alex's. I'm thinking of Joan Mitchell now. The difference being, I mean, there are many other differences, but one difference is just the width of the brush that where de Kooning was, really like to use house painting brushes.
Yeah.
Joan Mitchell always used, kind of very delicate, long filbert brushes, or brights, as they're called. So Alex's works on an axiom which is to use the largest possible brush to express that area. And if you try it, if you're painting, you'll see it changes the character of your work immediately. So this is the kind of things that I want to point to by saying, let's look at the how rather than the what. You can always come back to the what, that's another conversation.
Yeah.
But what makes the painting, what gives the painting its own identity is the how. And in Alex's case, again, there are many components. This is merely one, but it's an important one, is the unfussiness that results from the big brush, which forces you to make decisions. Right? You can't be fussy when you've got an 8-inch brush in your hand. Right? You have to be decisive. And if you start getting fussy with it, well, we all know what happens. It's not pretty. Right? So Alex has an expression that is pretty apt. He calls it noodling. When you can see a painting where there's a lot of kind of indecisiveness going on, where people are trying to find where the edge is, and they're trying to kind of mask a lack of decisiveness of, well, is it this plane? Is it that plane? Should it be this way or that? But there's a kind of smushing together of various states of being. That the term Alex gives to that is noodling. And noodling is, in the Katzian universe, is something to be avoided. So if you attack the job of covering the canvas with paint with a very wide brush, it discourages noodling.
Well, I mean, that's quite remarkable. You referring to the Ameritype painting, which is the famous Clement Greenberg essay in the 50s, which I can't wait until I ask Robert when he comes back. I think he's back, but let's just ask Jordan for now in terms of what David just described, the how and the what. What do you think of that, Jordan, in your own experience?
I mean, there were so many things. I was making all these notes because it felt affirming, and I think there is truth to that. It is about the how, and as a Black figurative painter right now, it is especially where I feel like I'm in this real constant tension of being kind of lumped into a sea of people, makers at this time, with the same subject, with the same kind of our understanding of subject, but that the actual how is what separates us so definitively. And yet it is the kind of tropes and the easy language around Jordan Casteel is a figurative painter who paints Black men, which just completely compresses the entire practice into a non-truth, actually. Like, I don't just paint Black men. And like, there's so many non-truths that then become defining factors of the work itself. And it makes a lot of sense in the context of Alex and in the context of his peers and making. I think we all kind of have these moments where the easiest way to define the form in front of us, it actually takes real nuance and care to try to see beyond the object as the sole representation of the truth of the artist, or the intention, or the hand, or the brush, or the kind of mastery of their craft. And I think that's what's so amazing when I'm in front of Alex's work, is that I definitely felt the intention, I felt the emotionality, I felt the humanness, like, and I love and respect Pearlstein's work, but I hadn't necessarily felt that in the same way. I think that can be a defining part of how we experience different works of art. So yeah, as David, you were saying that, I was clicking through all of the ways that I myself am definitely against, or fighting against, it was interesting to hear you, because you kept kind of referencing the repetition of needing to say it, that you've like said this 6 times, it's like, I'm always needing to say it. I've been saying it for years. I'm even going to say it again now. It's like the kind of insistence that we have to not actually hear the thing that you're saying as truth, and to use that as a real way of entering a viewing or experience of a work of art. That I think it is still hard. It's so hard for people to actually hear that and to do it in actuality, to really engage with the marks and the how.
Well, yeah, no, that's very perceptive for sure. I was thinking in reference what David said about Philip Guston, and you also mentioned that very same reason. I think that Philip, God bless his soul, who was the first American ever written on Picabia, Francis Picabia, adopt his graduate thesis, actually. He went back to study art history in order to teach. So his thesis on Picabia, David, Jordan, makes sense in the context how he treat the figure like tubes of plumbing. Yep. So it was never attention that Philip really wanted to bring the sensuality or the painterly flesh to the figure. But yep. I don't know whether Robert's here or not. We'll wait for him a while, but I think I can share the question with you both, because you mentioned about the kind of big brush, David, early on, which in a way, which is super true in the time when Alex was emerging in the 50s. The American type painting again implies the issues of scale, the issue of energy that you pointed out. It's interesting because I remember he emphatically said he wanted to make figurative painting that had the same scale and the same energy as that of Franz Klein's painting or the Kunins painting or Pollock and whatnot. I think he really wanted his work to have more muscle, more energy, so that they would knock their work off the wall. I mean, he occasionally said that with a kind of a glint of smile. But the point is that he's also very interestingly sensitive, because I know that sometimes he mentioned a friend, who go to dancing at the Palladium, and if he had a bad night, he would try to take the bouncer out, and that's what he wanted to do. He wanted to take the bouncer out. But then he's also being mindful, not being a jerk who competes with the wrong guy, so it's very interesting. And one of the painter that I remember talking to Alex that he was very jealous of and competing at the time, which is not as known, was Buford Delaney. Isn't that interesting? Who made, according to Alex, high impact painting, even though he wasn't that known, So I mean, he had a very interesting way of looking painting, more so than a lot of people we know. Oh, this is terrific. Chloe, this is a few images that we got from the museum just to share with our audience here how big, how massive this show is. And this is the Guggenheim. So obviously we had to be mindful that big painting Alex would not fit here, except for maybe 5 or 6 was shown here. So please go ahead. May as well go into the segment of the images, Chloe.
And Phong, I do believe Robert is here.
I am here now. I
Oh,
joined
great.
you.
Robert.
Yes, I'm sorry I was late. I was walking and it just took me longer with my wobbly legs to get home than I thought. And then I walked right into a cul-de-sac of digital stuff. So, you know.
Well, welcome to our intimate social intimacy Zoom. It's never too late. So Robert, I want to ask one quick question, which I asked both Jordan and David, which is that can you describe when you first encountered Alex's work and what impression it made on you and how it sustained over decades, and then to this very now retrospective, and whether it's have changed your perception?
Well, I guess I saw his work for the first time sometime mid to late 70s. The Art Institute of Chicago had a painting of 2 boys, which you just put on the screen at the Guggenheim, which I saw. And then I had seen a few other things here and there. It perplexed me. It was way too cool for me in my sentiment then. And one of the things I've learned from Alex is how to maintain one's cool without actually losing one's passion. But anyway, he was not on my radar. I was actually much more interested in Philip Pearlstein, who died yesterday. And I was a sort of straight ahead eyeball realist painter at that point. And Pearlstein's, austerity and deadpanness really, really appealed to me. Alex has a deadpanness, but it's a highly stylized, it's a highly sophisticated deadpanness. And I didn't know how to cope with that. But anyway, it took me a while to get from one to the other. And I stayed to a certain extent with both ever since.
What about the what and the how? We just talked about that subject matter and the way the pen sits on the surface. How
the what interested me, because the paintings that Philip painted were studio paintings, and they were contemporary people with all their lumps and warts and cellulite, whatever, very, very straightforward. And they were also naked. Alex was contemporary people with their clothes on, more than that, with their fashion on, with their style on. And the lack of obvious affect in his work was similar to the lack of obvious affect in Philip's work, but of a different character. And I think, once upon a time, I think all 3 of them, that is to say the 2 of them plus Al Held, were all in the Tanager Gallery together. That's a gallery with which Irving Sandler was deeply involved. He was the sweeper upper after artist. So there's a history of these 3 men that goes back to that point. And then each one of them branched out in a different direction. And Al Held sort of suppressed the obviously emotive side of abstract expressionism, but he continued to want to explore painting on a grand scale and spaces that were complex and so on. So these 3 men did a lot to rechannel the energies of abstract expressionism out of gestural painting to expand the scope and to change the affect of it, really. And that was all very interesting to me, because I'm a huge fan of de Kooning's and of Pollock's. Obviously, most people were at that point and still are who have any eyes. But you can't follow them. There was nothing to do after them directly. Although, as Alan Capros showed, there was something to do in installation after Pollock. But it was a really hard act to follow.
Yeah. Chloe, where are you? Can we see the first images and go through the rest of them rather quickly? Everyone can make comment. This painting really compelled a really close look for me.
Mm-hmm.
You walk in from the very beginning. It's a portrait of Alex's mother, Ella, and I was somehow reminded of Picasso blue period, 1901, those enclosed figure, melancholic, you remember all, very, very impoverished of depicting.
That's true of the palette to a certain degree, but her face is not a melancholic face. Her
Yeah,
face
it's-
has a smile to it.
Right, the painting is melancholic, but the sitter is not melancholy.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to recorrect that. I'm just saying, referring in as if he might have seen those paintings and
Well, of
whatnot.
course, everyone saw them at the time, of course.
Right. And I love the line in here. You notice how the pattern on the table is painted very flatly. And it's very tender portrait of Alex's mother. Can we see the next one? Yeah, this is 1950. Any comment on this, Jordan?
No, I mean, it's, for me, the use of line, the flatness, all of it, I think I quite enjoy. And seeing, again, just seeing these in person and seeing the process, it felt like a revolution of, or like a real kind of exploration of the actual process that I got to have by seeing works such as this, some of these earlier works.
Robert?
Yes, I mean, I think these things are fantastic. And I think he stripped figurative painting way down, but didn't leave it empty. He left it full. And so you see him blocking things out. I mean, you're taught in art school not to just outline and fill, right? So what does he do? He outlines and fills, and he does it with such dexterity, and he does it with such confidence that you can totally accept it as painting.
Right. David, last words?
I think this early painting is interesting also from the standpoint of color. Although people have said about Alex that he's a wonderful colorist, which is certainly true, I'm not sure that it's always understood just in what way he's a wonderful colorist. This painting, which is 1950, Phong, so how old is Alex at the time? He's pretty young.
Pretty young.
Incredibly sophisticated color harmony. So being a good colorist is really a matter of one color next to another, those two next to a third, and so on and so forth. The syncopation, the visual syncopation happening between the acidic yellow and the very pale blue, and then the slightly grayed green and the reddish russet hair and so forth. Those are incredibly sophisticated color relationships, which probably arrived at purely intuitively or just in the moment, but that's works along with the direct drawing to create an image which is still all this time later looks very, very fresh. So I think it's when I saw this painting in the show, which I hadn't seen before, I was really struck by how early Alex had arrived at this, I want to say, musical approach to building color harmonies, and how profound it is.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is that if the cliches about abstract expressionism are at least a little bit true, then there's nothing in this that's hot. It's all cool, but it is all radiant at the same time. And so cool is not the antithesis of radiant. It can be made radiant if you have subtle warm-cool relationships in the same value registry. And you can make things sizzle at the edges even so. When you go from that black of the woman's dress to the gray of the man, to the blue of the woman, to the pink apricot, whatever it is, all of those are shifts within a very low registry of warm and cool, but all of them react to each other, chromatically.
Super duper. And this is a time when Alex began painting on gesso on board, which is the practice he's still doing today. So this is something that I'm stunned of. I mean, I've seen this show at the New York Studio School that David Cohen curated in 2004 or 5, I remember. And the minuteness, what required to cut tiny piece of paper and overlay on this light wash of watercolor is something that I just couldn't understand, can't comprehend. Someone who can attack a huge canvas and have the most delicate of hand and craft this minute figure. Well, how do we describe this, you all?
Well, I think part of what you're seeing here is the ability to take the syntax of Matissean, painted paper pieces, and then pull it into the realm of lived experience, of intimacy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and to make an anecdotal work of art that is as fresh as a daisy in an idiom which is mostly associated with a kind of aggressive modernism. And that's fantastic,
Jordan, any words on this? I just
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more with it. Is the intimacy, I think, that of the scale of it by seeing it 4x6 and the actual, as you're saying, the intricacy of the cuts, I feel like I see his hands very much being the transcriber of this experience as a result of those like really delicate cuts, and yet it feels universal at the same time. Like that gouache middle that slightly indicates the dip in the hills is like, maybe it's a shadow of their bodies, whatever it might be, it holds me there. I think it's quite beautiful.
Okay, David, anything? Well, we can start with one. Why don't we start, David, with this painting? Wow, his two old friends. I think it's Rudy Burkhart's first wife, Edith Schloss. Any kind of insight to read into the distance of their psychological state of mind? What do you think?
I personally wouldn't want to go there. I'm just looking at this painting.
Okay, good. Stay with that, please.
I didn't know either of them personally. I read Edith's book recently. It was actually not as interesting as one had hoped. But this painting also strikes me as an example of extremely sophisticated post-Matissean color harmony.
Mm-hmm.
I can almost hear the musical chord that is struck by combining that tomato red orange with that hot yellow and the gray of the jacket and the contrasting bluish gray of the skirt, so forth. Those are simple as it is and very restricted as it is, and probably the more effective for being restricted.
Right.
The color, that's how to put it, the intervals between the colors, the distances of the intervals between the colors, the amounts of the colors and their proximity to each other is, forget about the subject. I don't even care who these people are. The expression of those colors in those shapes, because of course color is not in the world apart from a shape that it is attached to, it's just astonishing, really. I think it's probably just, I keep coming back to the same word. It's just incredibly sophisticated.
Great. That's
okay, well, I will just slightly digress to say that I did know one of these two people, and I read her book as well, but I knew Rudy quite well. I know that Rudy played an enormous role in Alex's life, was somebody that he really looked up to in certain respects. I know that Vincent Katz had a strong relationship with Rudy, and Rudy was a remarkably complicated critter and in the key to a lot of Alex's social life. So I see this as both a hugely sophisticated, simple painting in the way that David does, but I also see it as one of the instances where Alex tips his hand a bit to show you the closer kinds of emotions that he experienced, the things that he witnessed, because Rudy's dejection, and this is a marriage that went sour, Rudy's dejection is apparent, and her sort of stoic tolerance is also apparent. So I don't think you have to throw it all out. I think you don't have to know it either. I think it's a painting that will lead you there if you want to go. And if you want to go, the only way to get there, of course, is to read a little bit about these people if you couldn't meet them yourself.
Cool. Thanks, Robert. Why don't we move a little bit forward, a little bit faster? This one is amazing.
Yeah, this is fantastic.
This is the classic, I think, was given to Irvin and Lucy upon their wedding as a gift. And Jordan, any insight on how he put them in the middle of the canvas?
how he put them there. I mean, he sketched them there, I presume. But I think that intentional decision, just as Robert and David are saying, like the way that the stark white backgrounds, the way that they are centered, it frames them and draws them in as the most precious object in the space, is kind of what it feels like to me. And I love, the first thing I notice every time I see this painting is kind of the feet that feels oversized and really grounded and yet not, and the difference between their 2 feet and the way that they're drawn is very kind of like square, like triangular objects. And it's another moment where the use of color, the kind of graying and all around graying, which I perceive as being potentially a part of a wet background potentially, or it was mixed in palette beforehand, but it feels new, like we are seeing something begin to evolve out of the canvas, out of the white space into kind of a real form.
Super true,
Yeah.
and certainly a loving portrayal from what we last saw the last one. Okay, so
Yeah.
this is Ali a duck trap. David?
Actually, you know what, if we can go back to Lucy and Irving. So this painting is quite interesting because, I mean, I did know Irving Salle very well, and I know Lucy also. So I can vouch more for the accuracy with which Alex caught them as people. It's a little bit hard to put into words. There's a part of the Katzian effect is incredibly specific observation that is expressed with the minimum amount of expenditure of energy, so that on the surface of it, it's a very stark, simple, direct painting of 2 people, unfussy, undetailed, it could be accurate, could be accidental. However, if you really look at it, the poses of these 2 people, the postures, I should say, of these 2 people, and what it says about them as people and as how they are in the world is incredibly well observed. I mean, even if you didn't know anything about this guy, was there ever a better portrait of a kind of schlumpy New York Jewish intellectual mid-century than this portrait of Irving Sandler, his earnestness and his slightly hunched posture and dour, looking at it from under his bushy eyebrows. There's a kind of belief in life of the mind and truth and obtainable truth, those kind of things. Lucy, on the other hand, is much more seemingly looking up and has a different relationship to the world, a different style, different posture. The 2 of them together are just incredibly endearing and adorable. Yeah. So that's all communicated in the most efficient means. You could easily imagine making the same painting with the same few brushstrokes and the same spare compositional positioning and arriving at nothing like this expressivity. That's the remarkable part. There's tremendous expressivity, and then there's also tremendous restraint of means. And the 2 things are not usually found in the same picture. That's all I want to say about this painting. And we can go on.
That's amazing. Well, this one is a boy in the foreground, front and center. The subject of the scale that really haunted me, just like the way you describe Irving and Lucy too. He played with scale, sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. Subject we can talk about later. Can we move to the next one? We better go fast because I realize it's near 2 o'clock and we barely got through a few images here. Okay, classic Ada, 1959. Of course, we saw that great show just dedicated Ada, to whom he painted over 1,000 pictures. It's ridiculously productive, terrific. But we saw that show at the Jewish Museum. You all remember? But how do we put this in context, Robert? Because we talk about serialization, we talk about pop art and minimalism. I mean, this is way back. How do we?
I don't think any of those terms are terribly useful in relation to this painting, nor are they very motivational. I mean, I think that Alex was trying to find the most efficient way to describe something that was real in the world, and he wished to evoke, but not depict, not describe, not render. And so I was thinking a minute ago about Hakusai sketchbooks, where just a few lines, but they're actually quite naturalistic in many respects, but not every line itself strains to represent. So in this case, he does the same thing twice, but it's different each time. And that is a game that he plays throughout his paintings. How can I evoke this face, or I can bring this presence into the mind of the viewer with a minimum of means, which is not minimalism, but just say, I've got 5 moves to make. What are the 5 moves I'm going to make in this part of it? What are the 5 moves I'm going to make in that part of it? Can I do something with only 4 moves, and so on? And there's almost kind of, I think, a calculator in Alex's head that says, these are my options, and I'm going to reduce them to the least number if I can, but make them not feel like something is missing. And he's phenomenally effective at that, and he keeps rehearsing this over and over. And, people talk often about music and art, but one of the things about music is, and I live with a musician, is rehearsal. So if you think of each of Alex's paintings of Ada as a rehearsal for the next, and asking those questions of how do I strike this note effectively? How do I let it resonate long enough or not too long? All of that is in his mind. And I think that he was a fan of, cool jazz. He was a fan of modern dance. So performance is a key thing for him. And virtuosity is about an efficient performance of something.
Succinct and right on. I mean, this painting, I'm so happy that it's in the show. Jordan?
Oh, it's just like, this was one of my favorites in the show. I just was so engulfed in the use of the forms of these, the way the light is represented as these really stark shapes, but the kind of light reminiscent plant hanging on a shelf that clearly is kind of backlit that you can't actually see, and see the kind of, the play of what's visible, what's not visible, the placement of the forms, the kind of repetition of the painting behind the subject. It looks, it feels familiar, and it's great. I wish I could say more than that, but just so good.
We can move on to the next one. I think this one is monumental. It's huge, 78 inches here, 115 inches. And David, what do you think about this profile? Almost quite, not entire full profile, but it's slightly profile. And how he...
So Rob, is this 65, do you know?
63, it says.
63, I couldn't see the date. Well, one of the things that had been, as well as I know Alex's work, and I've known it very well for decades, but as well as I know it, and as well as I know him, and as closely as I've followed it, one thing that had remained somewhat mysterious, and I want to say this in kind of general terms, is often mysterious with any artist's work, is that point at which they kind of transcend their own premises and discover something that wasn't in the original mix, where the whole becomes more than the sum of the parts, and then it points to a new direction. So the transition from the Irving and Lucy painting, for example, to this painting, which is only a few years, to me is profound, because when in the early paintings, Alex is drawing the pose, the posture, the characteristics of the sitter, and more or less filling it in, as you said earlier. It's the thing you're taught not to do, to outline and fill in. It was, of course, the thing which animates Alex's early work. But there's not much internal structure. The eyes are located within the oval of the face and so on. But at a certain point in the early 60s, Alex discovers that he's actually fantastic at drawing. What drawing means is to disassemble a subject into discrete planes and to see how they are interconnected as paintable surfaces. And that awareness is what propels Alex forward in all of his subsequent work. And I think this painting is kind of right on the cusp. There's not a lot of structure, but there's a lot more structure here than there is in the portrait of Irving and Lucy. So
I think there's.
Go ahead, Rob.
I was going to say, I think this is also the dividing line between the sort of modesty of American painterly realism as he found it, with Fairfield Porter being out of the bellwether, and what he did with it, which is to take it to a public scale. You know, this is a billboard basically, and he recognized in billboards and in CinemaScope the possibility of blowing up what in painting had always been kept physically small and modest. So he's immodestly letting you in on a private world. And that is a huge conceptual leap. And I think one has to give credit to Alex for having rethought painting, not just done it a particularly virtuosic way. He's really rethought painting of this kind and changed the terms for it. And then when he broke away the backgrounds and then put figures in actual space, that was another step.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. It was the desire to make intimist figurative painting compete with billboard scale, with the scale of pop art, which of course was the animating, Alex's kind of never-ending sense of competition with the animating impulse. However, to do that, to blow that figure up to billboard scale, if it did not have that internal structure, I don't know how interesting it would have been as painting. So it was the two things together, the discovery of his analytical drawing capabilities with the desire to blow these other people out of the water that results in the Katz effect.
Well, it's also that he adapted old-fashioned studio technique of drawing, enlarging, drawing again, enlarging again, and so on and so forth. So this is the most traditional result of a non-traditional vision of what realism could be. But the methodology is what anybody would have done in the 17th century had they thought of doing this. And so I think, here you can see is where the brush mark is the painting, right? And the next ones the ones we just saw, is where there's no single brush mark that does what any brush mark in this painting does. Ted Berrigan, and it's like, this was the small world of poetry being painted in a kind of small way. Kynaston, the one we just saw before that, was a part of that world, and you can see him struggling for what the brush mark should be on the side of the face and so on. But when he did the Ada, he knew exactly what he was doing, and that comes before this, and then he went further with that as time went by.
Yeah. Jordan, any remarks on those?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how the literal structure of the canvas frame becomes the initial lines and marks in the drawing that I think they feel acknowledged in the same way that every other line or mark he's making is. They become active in a really exciting way.
I also noticed how, as you described the Ada in that nearly full profile, the hair that overlap onto the right, David, over the band, have the similar function as the way that the resting hand of Kynaston's portrait.
Yeah.
And then
the other thing to say about this portrait of Ada, just forget that it's Ada. I mean, flip it upside down in your mind's eye and just look at the color relationships. This expansive tomato red, this expanse of pale peach, this expanse of gray, this expanse of certainly one of the weirdest blues that it's both, I don't know, it has a lot of green in it, whatever it's built out of, and then another little strip of gray, and then a tiny fragment of red, orange in the corner, which is a really risky thing to do. I mean,
Yeah.
just, and then not to forget the white arc at the bottom, just as an abstract painting of flat color areas, it's already remarkable.
True.
And also just in terms of style notes, because Alex is very, very interested in fashion and always has been. And the pink of the lips is the pink of lipstick specifically. You know, it's not just a red mouth, and there's a red in the background that would kill any other red, but this slightly, you know, I don't know what you call it. It has a quality that only lipstick has.
True. Let's move forward a few more. Obviously, we have the legendary blue umbrella. Look how amazing. I just forgot how huge this painting is. So it was a pleasure to see classic Ada. What can we say?
It's the one that got away. I tried to buy this painting from MoMA and I couldn't get anybody to be interested in it.
Oh, Jesus, that's terrible.
That's definitely sad.
Rob, is that really true? That's a,
Yes. I did. I tried.
All right, Robert. We won't torture MoMA anymore.
no, why? No reason not to.
You're my guest. I'm out of there. So
So this is another instant where billboard size, Robert. We talked about scale earlier.
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know how to describe it either, but we know when it this size, it's exactly what he said early on, where he wanted to make figurative painting that would knock off Franz Klein off the wall or Paul. They certainly can do it. I think we have 2 more images. Am I right, Chloe? And then we can sort of talk a little bit. I love to see, well, this is another classic, sociability, which is Alex famous for. But let's see what we look at Hiroshi drawing. I think it's nice to see Hiroshi drawing, to see the control, the brilliant ability to draw. You mentioned that earlier, David. But I never seen anybody draw with this incredible, tender, light touch. Must have been 8H pencil, you know? And it's amazing. I mean, this is like as good as early de Kooning when he was making it, portrait of Elaine. And then to see the finished painting after the drawing, such an incredible joy to see. And I don't know how to describe it. I look at this painting and I was blown away by the line below Hiroshi's ear, one sweeping line that go all the way down to the edge of his jacket, you know? There's certain finesseness, elegant, arabesque quality, which I think he extend Matissean arabesque sensibility. And is you right to say Katzian, David? Can we see a few more and then maybe we can open up talking a little bit? Oh yeah. Robert?
well, this is an extension of what I was saying about the silhouettes. And he then begins to take the same silhouette and repeat it as he did with the double Adas, but it's different in this context because it does look like I don't know, a film still or something like that. It's very hard to describe what it is or what it's like. And yet both of them show Ada with a kind of steeliness that you don't see in a lot of the other pictures. And Ada was and is the perfect muse for Alex. I mean, I did a text for the show that he did at the Jewish Museum, and I just said at the end something about how Ada is superb, and she is, and he makes her superb, and he is so in love with her style, with the woman too, but with her style.
Yeah, I like to show the sketch of the landscape, Chloe. Yeah, that's just the study for Crosslight number 3, and here's a finished painting. I love to hear what you think of these parent, Jordan, because you were there. I was there.
Yeah, I mean, the studies in particular really, as someone who has recently moved into the woods, I felt literally at home here. I mean, I understood those lines so explicitly, and the way that the color is accentuated. Again, there's that really kind of lime green against the evergreen kind of cool backdrop, but the way that those little light green specks are emulated on the front. And it's just, the scale, I think, also was part of what really captured me. They're 12 by 9 inches, and having them kind of in conjunction. Some of them were placed in the same room as the bigger kind of final work. And I think I just felt that this observation was like, I am seeing the literal observation of that moment. The then larger painting version of it, I think, holds a similar success, but you can tell is referential. It's kind of like trying to recreate something. This feels more like the stars or something. It felt like a more universe world to me than trees initially. But I love how those things get translated over time in the recreation and sitting with a subject for longer.
So you're saying that they are trees, but then in the light and the brushstroke gives a sense of,
yeah, like for these, I don't read trees in this in the same way. They feel like specks of light moving through the universe, like literally in space. Like that's the way this painting in particular felt to me, just because of those really light, subtle changes in color and the subtle changes that you lose that kind of lime green that was referential, like referencing leaves, I think in the study. It really is a dual color painting, and thus it becomes kind of something else for me. But the reference of the strokes that go from the top to the bottom, you still feel something is being tall or moving very explicitly across the plane.
And the virtuosity, the technical virtuosity required to make a painting like this is really something else, because these are not, as in some of his paintings, distinctively jigsaw puzzle kind of pieces that fit together. They're just floating tones and marks, and they're suspended in this solution of other floating tones and marks, and yet somehow it all coheres. And the risk involved in these paintings is far greater than I think many people realize, because it works. You can pull it off. But in fact, to get that to come, and if you've seen them in the flesh, in process or finished, they're vast, and you could get lost in a painting like this so easily, or could lose your bearings in it while making it, in which case it would all fall apart.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rob. They're so atmospheric. Yeah, as you said, it's a web of marks sustaining other webs of marks, and either it comes off or it doesn't. I mean, to me, it's as a very clear musical analogy. It's like late Mahler versus early Mahler. There's you have to really have internalized the structure to be able to work at this level, and at the scale too.
Yeah, why don't we open up to the not quite the audience, because I have a few more questions. I want to elaborate more, because you mentioned about atmospheric space or something that early on the word glimpses of light. I mean, maybe you kind of mentioned that too, Jordan. It's a constellation of light, and that can be abstract too. It doesn't have to always represent a certain representation or imagery and whatnot. But as far as the idea of atmosphere, it's early on. We kind of forget when Alex was coming to his own in the 50s. De Kooning was making one of his most legendary work, which is the Woman series. That was 51 to 53, which propelled the whole movement of figurative expressionism. I would say, whether Bob Thompson was part of it, Robert Bouchard, I'm sure, Lester Johnson. There's strings of other painting that may fit into that whole movement. But what I was thinking now is the idea of atmosphere. You remember when de Kooning was painting the Woman series, the space, what he called is non-environmental. Remember, Robert? It's claustrophobic, it's condensed. And Alex managed to expand that, get out of that abstract expressionist scale and expand it into a greater spacious sense, whether he's painting the city or he's painting the landscape. So, which brings to my first question, which is the idea of style. the idea of style, because I remember when I first interviewed Alex for his last show with Pace, when Pace was still called Pace Winterstein. Remember in 2009, I remember I brought up Baudelaire, you know, the Baudelaire description of the dandy as an individual who's regarded as a sharp, you know, acute observer of contemporary life, contemporary society, particularly in tune with what consider contemporary in how people dress. In other words, anyone can look at the clothing of Alex painting. They can certainly tell what time period it was painted in, you know. And then I remember asking Alex about that. How could Alex keep up with the social changes by the appearances of things? Why maintain his own painting afresh? And I don't know how to describe it, but how do you describe that, Robert?
I'm not sure where to begin with that, because that's a huge bundle of things, but let me just grab this little bit. And in general terms, abstract expressionist was a muscular painting, and I'm not going to get lost in all the sexual politics of that, but it was where you saw somebody's physical strength at work, and you saw their mode of address at work. Alex is so sure of what his body can do that he does it in the least emphatic way possible to create an emphatic image. And that's the paradox of his works. He never sweats. He never breaks out in a sweat when he's doing it. And yet everything is really right there for you. And it's a kind of generosity. It's a kind of confidence. It's coolness. And you know, the business of being cool has been much written about in many contexts, you know, of Miles Davis or what have you. But, you know, he's a guy who doesn't show the sweat. He doesn't want to, you know, sort of arm wrestle you into submission. He just puts it there in front of you and realizes that if he does it in a certain way, you won't forget it.
Yeah. David, anything to add about the emergence of Alex? Remember early on around the 80 or so, maybe 80, 81, when...
Wait, just talking about the style, what
Yeah.
the components about the style are. How to put it, there's I've noticed it about a number of people of Alex's generation, more or less, and so it could even be partly generational, although I still don't think it's restricted to that generation, something that's hopefully ongoing. And it's not to do with minimalism as an aesthetic or as a critical idea, but it is to do with something which maybe is more connected to architecture and design, from which minimalism took its aesthetic cues. And that is this thing which Robert's talking about, is to express the thing with the least amount of fuss. If you know how something is made, if you know how something is designed, or if you can design something that's so that it can be made with the least amount of effort, that is, in a certain aesthetic universe, that is a priori good. That is an aesthetic good. And the Alex is on the side of that efficiency.
Absolutely.
It's a kind of efficiency, directness, unfussiness, which is born out of understanding how things are made and how things work, how things fit together. So it's not that he's flaunting his expressivity or that he's withholding his expressivity. What he's doing is showing how things are made and making it in a way, which Robbie said something very wonderful a minute ago. He's making it in a way that if he knows if it's done right, you will remember it. It will, that thing which is seemingly rather effortless is something that you won't forget visually.
And we don't.
And you don't, yeah. So it has to do with how, like, just knowing how our society used to value people who knew how things were done, how things were made. And the technology has overtaken all of that. So it's no longer valued in the same way, maybe, or at all. And maybe it became gendered. I don't really know. I'm not a sociologist, but anyway, we don't have the same relationship to knowledge or to competence that we used to in the past. but there was a time when just competence was a thing, and it had an aesthetic component, an aesthetic correlation, and that's what Alex's style is rooted in. It's not the only component, but it's one of the main components.
Jordan, last word before we open up to the Q&A.
I have no last word. I'm glad to be a witness and a part of this conversation. It's a real, I just had a moment of like, this is really special. So that's all I have to say.
Jordan, I like a lot what I see behind you.
Yeah,
Yes.
the landscapes are happening.
Well, thank you, Jordan. Thank
It's a
you,
funny thing
Rob.
when you move to the country, you start seeing landscape.
Yeah.
Totally. I mean, but that's part of the brilliance of even re-engaging with Alex's work for me at this moment of, I've been feeling like these are actually the most portraits I've ever made. And much of that has to do with the kind of subjectivity of the thing that is really about observational space. But yeah, anyway.
A true clean ankle bohemian. I mean, we didn't get to talk about Alex, broader communities, poet, writers, dancer, choreographer. We didn't quite get there, but definitely is a most natural bohemian that ever lived. Alex and Ada's life, in a way, personify the aspiration that we at the Brooklyn Rail would like to recreate without nostalgia. But what is really amazing about Alex too, and Ada, when they transpose, they go to Maine, and then he became almost like, I don't know, like a Buddhist monk on top of the mountain reading Virgil. It's quite amazing. All right, so let's see if we can stop here.
Can I just briefly put in a plug that if anybody goes up to Maine, they should stop at Colby College, because there is a sidebar show to this exhibition, which is Alex's collaboration with musicians, theater people, and dancers, and performance art. And it's really a beautiful show. And there are everything from, the cutout figures that he did, I think, have their origin in basically paper doll-like forms that he used for designing costumes for dance programs. The flat color is part of the same theatricalization of an empty space. And, I'm not saying that this show lacks anything. The one at the Guggenheim has more than you can possibly take in, but there's quite a lot in the Colby show, and it's really worth seeing.
And you are the curator of the show, Robert.
I was one of a couple of curators. There's the local curator from the museum, Levi Prombon, is very, very good. And so, I'm not going to take credit for everything by any means, but I had an awful lot of fun doing it. I'll tell you that.
Why don't we invite you two to come back for round two?
Okay.
Why don't we do that? But again, I'm grateful to you all, because we can't really cover everything. There's a verbal acrobat aspect of Alex also that we'd love to be able to explore that maybe the next. But for now, why don't we open up? We get back to you, Chloe, for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much for that incredible and warm conversation about this exhibition. I'm really grateful to you all, and that was just a true pleasure to listen to. So thank you. We do have a few questions and we have a few minutes, so I'm going to allow GE to ask your question first. Go ahead, GE.
Thank you so much, Chloe. The one word I've always thought of that occurs to me when I think of Alex Katz is honesty. And can the gatherer talk a little bit about how he's still deeply involved in perfecting that honesty as he gets deeper and deeper into his maturity?
What do you mean, honesty relative to what?
Just straight out feeling of being in the moment and looking forward and being totally aware and trying to get that down, that moment, that everything just then and there.
I don't know. Honesty is a word that has so many moral connotations,
Right.
and I don't think that they're irrelevant, but I'm not sure that they're the most relevant thing one can say about Alex. So I hesitate to go there. That's all.
Thank you so much for that question, GE.
Thank you.
And that answer in and of itself. So John Donnelly in the audience has several questions. I'm going to ask one of them. How do you follow the painterliness of de Kooning? David mentioned this too, but Robert seems to imply, and I agree, Alex still is about the touch and application and color of the paint. The subject carries the paint. Do you think Alex, and the viewer for that matter, is first interested in the painting touch, its intimacy, its coolness, and then the subject or the sitter?
Why separate them? I mean, why don't we just say that that's what we're trying not to do, is to separate them. You experience them as a totality.
Well said.
Thank you for that question, John. And thank you so much for that succinct yet powerful answer, David. The next question is going to be from Daniela, who will ask directly. Daniela, I'm going to ask you to unmute now and you'll be able to do so.
Hello. This question in particular is for Jordan Casteel. You had mentioned that while enjoying the exhibit, there was a particular point where you just wanted to experience the pieces. I was wondering if there is that happened while you entered the museum, or if there was a particular piece that you felt moved in this direction.
Yeah, it was definitely while I entered the museum. I mean, like Phong said, we were sardines kind of packed in. I entered a room where the whole initial atrium was just packed with people. And I was trying to, I knew that I really just wanted to see the work from the beginning. I think just based off my own energy. I think we all know the times and places where I was like, I don't know how social I'm feeling tonight. So I kind of wanted to dive into the work, but what I wasn't expecting was to hit the first kind of turn where you're encountering his work on the, the turn of the Guggenheim. And I immediately was like, oh, like this is, I want to see everything. Like, not only do I want to see the work and kind of engage kind of socially by looking at the work at an opening, but I was like, I really want to spend time with each one of these paintings. And I don't know if I'm going to achieve that when every, step I take, somebody's stopping me and saying hi or whatever. But I was like really trying to be invisible quickly from that point on.
Thank you so much for that response, Jordan, and for that question, Daniela. The last question is going to be from Andrew Woolbright, and I'm going to ask on Andrew's behalf due to some connection issues. Andrew says, I feel like most artists, you can tell how they feel about culture very quickly, whether they feel that it's alienating or whether they feel like it's something they want to participate in. Katz holds the tension there well. Is Katz and style acknowledging that he can't form an exterior position to it? Is there an acknowledgement that he's unable to individuate as well, and the bohemian is inescapable and all we are left with is staying cool?
Go for it, guys.
Well, I mean, I could answer this. I think, we didn't quite get there, but Alex acrobatic skill, verbal skill is inseparable from his incisive observation, and I know that David, this is what everybody kind of mentioned, certainly John Russell too, but you, in your book, you kind of mentioned that too. His off-the-cuff observation are fearless, very precise, like haiku. We've been doing that, some of us. For example, I can give you, let's say, a failed painting may be diagnosed as having no inside energy, or an artist afflicted by his or her grandiosity would be considered as first-class decorator. My favorite is about Sandro Chia in Alex's book, this wonderful book here about his haiku remarks about other people. What he say about Sandro Chia is amazing. In his height of the 80s, whose work Alex liked for having engaged all kind of people, as a modern form of ancient art, with certain kind of unapologetic nostalgia without being conservative or condescending. Alex, in other words, like Sandro, worked for his bluntness And he says Sandro was #1 in the pizza house style. You remember that, David? For bringing his to the mass. And then Sandro went on to refine his work. So he left the pizza house for the coffee house, which became less engaging. I don't know if that answered or not, but I like to end it there, just because, just want to bring how amazing Alex can be in summing up other people's work, you know? Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Phong. And thank you again to David, Robert, and Jordan for this conversation. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Parker Menzimer, to the stage. Parker Menzimer is a poet and editor in New York. His chapbook, The Links, was published by 1080 Press in July 2022. His writing has appeared in Bomb, Epiphany, Tiding House, Works and Days, and other places. He earned his MFA from Brooklyn College, where he was a Truman Capote Fellow. Welcome, Parker.
Hey, thank you so much, Chloe. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around if that's what you're opting to do. I need to say that I was so touched and honored to be invited to participate in this reading to share my work following a conversation with Robert and David and Jordan and Phong. It really meant so much to me, and it means so much to me. And so thank you so much, Carolyn Ferrucci, for inviting me. I'm going to read a poem by Frank O'Hara to start, which I thought would be fitting for the day. And then I'm going to move on to reading a series of alternating prose and poetry pieces that I'm working on as part of a manuscript in progress. So this is a poem that's untitled, On the Subject of Love by Frank O'Hara. Light, clarity, avocado salad in the morning. After all the terrible things I do, how amazing it is to find forgiveness and love, not even forgiveness. Since what is done and forgiveness isn't love, and love is love, nothing can ever go wrong. Though things can get irritating, boring, and dispensable in the imagination, but not really for love. Though a block away you feel distant, the mere presence changes everything like a chemical dropped on a paper. And all thoughts disappear on a strange, quiet excitement. I am sure of nothing but this, intensified by breathing. So that's Frank O'Hara. All right. Then she said I couldn't sing. I said, what do you mean? She pushed past me. At the East Bay Vivarium, the black and green geckos seemed to glow from within. On the damp, grassy slope at Terrace Park, under a thin layer of fog, we had tentative sex. I broke down each poem into 12-letter phrases and made hundreds of anagrams. That was 2006. I still confused the Caldecott and Waldo tunnels. I thought if I studied iambic pentameter, I could reverse engineer my California English. One has rainbows painted on its southern portals. I took Shakespeare's Fair Youth sonnets and added a couple of personal details. The young man is wasteful, but you can't reverse engineer a landfill no matter how bad you want it. I made a word cloud. I spent a lot of time on nosweatshakespeare.com. Look in my glass. As our genes permutate in foul mouths, lilac on which poison arrows hinges. One microdose, hottie zens in the heath, means well may Dame Wart bloom in her lifetime. Tacked henges binge, well lathe to be so dear. Today I boil alone, dusty oat. Whatnot, forget-its and terabyte drives, in only Louboutins showered in gold. I've passed out feeling jocular and cheap, trying to answer what's in 5 o'clock that's not in any other mortal hour. Thinking, Lincoln, get off that turpentine. You've hastened to take a measure of art. Don't let the door hit you on your way out. How can I know I correctly identified feelings I don't have now? When Molly gets overexcited or really into a bit, her features change and her face becomes magnetic, as though hijacked by a mirthful mercurial spirit. It was a stroke at age 61. Quote, the first 17 sonnets, for example, seem to be addressed to a fair youth, an aristocratic young man imploring him to get married and have children, end quote. A handsome ranger dressed in waterproof pants and a neat checkered flannel showed me how highway ice plant can quickly desiccate a human tongue. I liked to climb Indian Rock to see Albany assume the scale of a Brio train set. Quote, it was my special party and you didn't show up, she said. the soft crescents beneath her eyelids slick with tears. The water was so dark it seemed invisible, except where it threw up the haloed reflections of distant, unaccountable lights. My father, Buddha laughing. I thought the night sky must be jealous. Then I shared my poem about grocery shopping, and Moira said she didn't believe that the speaker would need food stamps. By the time we moved on to karaoke, she was genuinely belligerent. Quote, a sense of the universal equality of all things, equivalence destroys aura by the removal of the object from its constituting context, end quote. I was born at Alta Bates Hospital in Oakland on a Sunday. I lectured on the autofictional tendency, locating it in the works of Hervé Guibert and Annie Ernaux. Quote, Lord Aldenham's fragment was not the only manuscript at Burlington House that Morris coveted. He fell in love also with the Psalter belonging to the Duke of Rutland, one of the greatest achievements of English Gothic illumination, end quote. I remember my father got religious about compost, on modesty, making oneself heard without recourse to the generalities of rhetoric. I think that sentimentality is a complicated virtue in poetry, where the rose demurs, tender as the joint. I said to Molly, we can both be very cruel and stupid and also very forgetful and stupid. He showed me which flowers attract monarch butterflies. Touching Leora was a totally immersive experience. I felt pleasurably trapped in a cycle of death and rebirth for many hours. After spacing out, I found I was crying hot, thick tears in the back of an Uber. On the day I was born, my mother wore white Reebok trainers. A ray of California sunshine hotly bisected my right cheek. I cherished that knowledge among her tulips, pansies, and gladiolas. Thy truthy legion, what dost thou enclose? Enclose thyself, thy statue's lacy cage. Rent shakes, bees-esque, ingesting but dry toast. And being frank, I burn to be abased. Besooth, testoon, vainglory, absentee. Florist, your flowers wet, so duteous. Staggers, tear gas, fetus who canst unsee. Dichotic, iatric, bloodlet, fetish. Friendless, I copy voided discount codes. Test auto-tune, sour rags whose obtuse sooth. New note, ultra clean, leech stem bent oboe. Watchable snuff footage brings down the mood. Sweaty nude, graceful arms besmut thee. One duchy iced in utero, etra. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Wow, thank you so much, Parker. That was incredibly inspiring, and thanks very, very much for that reading. It was a perfect conclusion to this conversation. And thank you again to Jordan. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, David. Thank you, Phong, for that incredible conversation today. Thank you to the team at the Guggenheim, especially Ivy and Catherine Brinson for their support ahead of today, and Vincent Katz as well. And we'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive. You can view today's event and our full archive on our YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like here on our daily NSE. This holiday season, help us sustain our work and reach our goal of raising $150,000 towards the Rail's writers, editors, and operations. Your support will keep our issues and our events like this one free. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with artist Heather Hart and Zoe Hopkins on the occasion of She Cuts Through Worlds at Davidson Gallery in New York. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Woogie Bay. And as is tradition, you can now turn on your microphone and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you again for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to see you all in the chat, leaving kind words for the speakers today, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you, Jordan.
Bye. Thank you, Phong. Thanks, Robert. Good to see you.
Robert,
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks,
Parker,
Jordan.
for the beautiful
Thank you.
reading.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Great.
Richard.
Much.
But Andrew, hello.